This little video will give you some background into brand responsibility and the sports industry. The professional sports industry and the college sports industry too can be incredibly influential on society. Certainly once the pandemic hit and we saw sports teams have to shut down their seasons and then their training camps, we saw how people were kind of at a loss about what to do when their favorite sports teams were no longer available. Um, and the sports industry is increasingly the highlight of the subject of the media, certainly with sports teams starting back up again in the summer. This was a big focus on whether teams can be safe, their roles in the community, and what happens when that community changes, players as role models, and what happens when you have players with problematic behaviors, and then salaries in terms of is there salary equity in men and women's teams. So, and this chart shows that for soccer, the answer is no, there isn't equity. So there are lots of issues that we've talked about before in the things we've talked about that also apply to sports leagues. So we'll look at some of those in our movies today. Every industry is unique. We've talked about the advertising industry, the grocery industry, the fashion industry. So every industry is unique, and the sports industry is unique as well. Sports teams can be brands, so that brings a set of unique aspects to it. Sports teams, though, are uniquely embedded in communities, and they have a huge power to improve community well being as people feel like they're part of something. When they cheer on a team, the teams give back by improving neighborhoods and participating in local charities. So there's a lot of really strong team community connections. Sports teams are incredibly dependent on consumer and government support. They need government support in order to build stadiums, to negotiate salaries, and they need huge amounts of consumer support to attend games and buy merchandise. If consumers don't attend games, regardless of how much money a team can make through its television rights, if consumers don't attend games, people don't go to games, the sport is going to be lost. Um, and there's a societal expectation that professional sports will contribute more to society than just a really fun game. There's this idea that teams are supposed to support communities. They're supposed to support the well being of their employees. They're supposed to promote safety and integrity. The teams represent their host cities, and there's a relationship referred to as social identity that many fans believe that the team's successes are contingent on the fans' support and loyalty. And thus, the teams and athletes need to give back to the fans who showed that support. And this is so much stronger in sports than in any other industry. The social responsibility of sports is distinct from and arguably more powerful than responsibility initiatives in other industries due to four factors: passion, economics, transparency, and stakeholder management. So let's look at each of these four things individually. For many teams, people's passion for the team is really high. People can be more passionate about a sports team and that brand than any other type of a brand. Sports fans identify as members of the team community, if not as members of the team itself. So we think about the Seattle Seahawks, and they refer to their fans as their 12th man. Fans express deep connection with their team brands, and this passion is unmatchable in any other industry. One study showed that response to responsibility initiatives was directly related to levels of passion. The more you care about your team, the more you'll be engaged in any type of responsibility initiative that a team takes on. So we can see the power that a team with a strong fan base can have. There's this really interesting theoretical concept about the link between a team's performance, such as their win loss records, and a fan's subsequent behavior. So there's something called berging. Berging stands for basking in reflected glory. People are likely to share in the team's glory. Fans of successful teams are more likely to use pronouns such as we or us when discussing the team's performance on social media. So when a team is doing well, fans often show berging behaviors, basking in reflected glory. And the opposite of berging is called quarfing, cutting off reflected failure. And that's when people increase the distance between themselves and unsuccessful teams in order to avoid negative associations. After a team loss, fans were more likely to use terms like they or them when describing the team. So the passion is built when a team is doing well. And so that then is going to influence how a team's social engagement, whether that's going to be successful or not. Fascinating. Economics for sports teams are less market dependent than for other types of brands. So we don't have the supply and demand thing that's going on with sports, except of course when we don't have sports, than we do with things like milk. So the economics depend more on the close ties between the leagues, the teams, and the host cities, and they depend on the close cooperation between civic leaders and team management and players. So there's this kind of web of influence and importance that plays into how successful a brand will be, a sports brand will be economically. Another unique aspect is that information about the sports industry is more widely available than many other businesses make their data available. Team and athlete outcomes are constantly monitored and advertised in terms of statistics. Player salaries, movement, and usage generate buzz and public engagement on social media. Off the court and off the field behavior of athletes and other high level sports employees, such as coaches, both positive and negative, is subject to much greater public attention than behavior of employees in other industries. And then responsibility programs need a greater responsibility because of, I'm sorry, greater accountability because of that. And finally, stakeholder management is really important. Most brands rely on their employees and some material suppliers to provide a finished product. But a sports team relies on a ton of stakeholders. So there's the players, and then there's the team personnel. There's the media, they're the fans, they're the sponsors, they're the policemen who provide security, they're the vendors who work in the stadiums. There are all these stakeholders that have to cooperate and work with the teams in order to give the final product, which is an exciting game. And the success of many league led social responsibility efforts depend on the cooperation from all these entities. And in fact, usually we see more of a localized effort of a team doing some type of responsibility effort around something that's really important to their community, which makes sense on so many levels, especially from what you've seen about the importance of community in this uh, little video. But remember, a while ago, we also talked about in times of stress and crisis that people tend to look more locally. And so maybe it's not just in times of stress and crisis. Maybe national brands like to pretend that people don't the people aren't as concerned with their community as they are with larger issues. And maybe this evidence from sports teams shows really the importance of local communities for any type of brand.